Chapter 6: Bone Tissue and the Skeletal System. The learning objectives in this chapter is to understand the main functions of the skeletal system. We'll study how bones are classified depending on its shape or internal organization. We'll study the bone markings. We will study the histology of bone, the different types of cells that's found in bone and their function. We'll study the function and structure of compact bone and spongy bone. We'll also study how bone is formed by two mechanisms: endochondral ossification and intramembranous ossification. You'll be able to describe how the bone heals from a fracture. We'll also study calcium homeostasis, how bone plays a huge role in maintaining calcium levels in our body. We'll talk about aging, the effects of aging on bones. So, the main functions of the skeletal system, the skeletal system made up of bones, cartilage, ligaments, tendons, and supporting connective tissue, gives structure and form to the human body. So, this is the main framework on which everything else is added on. So, it plays a huge role in bringing about movement in the human body. Bones are very protective in function. For example, your skull is protecting your brain, and your thoracic cage is going to protect your lungs and your heart, and the pelvis will protect your reproductive organs and the urinary system. In the marrow of the bones inside is where your red blood cells, all your blood cells are made. Hematopoiesis is happening here. It is also a reservoir of fat, which is the yellow marrow, so it is an energy reserve. Bones is a reservoir of minerals like calcium and phosphates, so it plays a huge role in the homeostasis of minerals. So, main functions are support, storage of minerals, blood cell production. It's called hematopoiesis. Your RBCs, your WBCs, your platelets are all made in the bone marrow. It is very protective in function, and it brings about movement at the joints. When the muscle contracts, it will bring about movement in a joint. What is bone made up of? So, bone is classified as a supporting connective tissue, and all connective tissue will have a ground substance or matrix and then fibers in it with special cells. So, the bone, being a supportive connective tissue, will also have these three components. Here, the matrix is mineralized, so it's a solid. So, the main mineral being calcium. So, this unique combination of both organic and inorganic substances make the bone very, very strong and a little bit flexible. It doesn't break easily, it gives in a little bit. So, the main organic component of the bone is collagen protein. The inorganic components, 39% is calcium, phosphates, there's magnesium, sodium, potassium, and carbonate. 99% of your body's calcium and phosphates are locked up in the bone. The carbonates, magnesium, sodium, phosphate. So it's a bank, it's a reservoir of minerals. How are bones classified? So bones are classified by shape. It is also classified by internal organization, if it's compact or spongy. So a human adult has about 206 bones, and they can fall into any of these 5 categories: a long bone, as the name indicates, is very long. It's longer than it's wide. The main function is leverage. Example are femur, tibia, fibula, humerus, ulna. Short bones are like cube shaped, like a square. They'll provide stability, and they will also allow for some motion. It is found in the carpals and tarsals in your body. Flat bones are thin, and it can be carved, not carved, curved. So here's a flat bone. They make the different bones of your skull. They can be points of attachments of muscles and other uh, ligaments. They are protective in nature. So you can see flat bones in your skull, your ribs, sternum, your scapula. Irregular bone is irregular shaped. Your vertebrae is a good example of irregular bone. Sesamoid bone are small and rounded, and they are usually found in places of stress. So here's a patella of your kneecap, which is a sesamoid bone. The bones that are found in the sutures of your skull are called sutural bone. What are bone markings? So when you take a bone, it has all these projections and depressions or holes or lines, and these are important attachment points for ligaments and tendons. So ligaments will connect bone to bone, and tendons will connect the bone to a muscle. And it also will form joints. So they are called articulations. It might have grooves or holes for arteries and veins and nerves to pass through. So these features, external features of a bone, are called bone markings. So an articulation is where the bones meet. The head, so the head is a prominent round surface that will play a huge role in a joint. A facet is a flat surface. A condyle is a rounded surface. A projection is a raised marking. A protuberance is something that's projecting out of the bone. A process is a prominent feature. A spine is a sharp process. Tubercle is a small round process. Tuberosity is a rough surface. A line is a elongated ridge. A crest is like a flat ridge. A fossa is a depression. A sulcus is a groove. A canal is a passage. A fissure, see here there's a fissure in the orbits. It is like a crack or a slit. A hole is called as a foramen, so a hole in the bone. So these bone markings are very important for articulations, for attaching ligaments and tendons, and for providing a passageway for arteries and veins. This is a structure of a long bone. So here's a femur. And see the swollen, the wide ends of the bone are called epiphysis. Epi means on top of. So the ends of the bone is called epiphysis. It's the wide part, followed by a region called metaphysis. So you can see metaphysis here, right next to it. And the shaft of the bone is called diaphysis. So if you do a cross section of the bone, the outside of the bone is made up of a compact bone, whereas the inside is spongy bone. It looks like a coral. It has the architecture is different. It's in the epiphysis where articulations happen. So it is covered by a hyaline cartilage, which is called articular cartilage. So this will help to reduce friction when bone moves on bones. It will reduce friction and it will give a protection and a cushioning function. In metaphysis, you see again, it's called epiphyseal line or the growth plate. So this is happening only in adolescence up to puberty. So it's the epiphyseal line, and this is where growth happens. So it's also a cartilage here. And then when you come to the diaphysis or the shaft of the bone, the hollow cavity is called the medullary cavity. It is either filled with yellow bone marrow, which is a source of energy because it's all fat, or red bone marrow, where the red blood cells are formed. Bone is heavily nourished with arteries. It has a rich blood supply. The membrane that covers the bone and protects the bone is called periosteum. So it's a tough, dense, fibrous connective tissue that's protecting the bone. And the connective tissue in the medullary cavity is called endosteum. Structure of a flat bone. So here, see, this has a very unique microarchitecture. You can see it looks like a sandwich. There's two layers of compact bone, which is very dense, and then there is spongy bone in the center. So this architecture is called diploe, and it is found in your skull. And the main reason being it is strong, gives your skull a lot of protection, but also it reduces the weight of the skull. So, flat bone has a unique architecture of two compact bone with spongy bone in the center. So, let's look at the histology of bone. Osseo means bone. So, there's lots of terminology that will start with osteo. So, here, this is what the bone will look like in a microscope. So, this is the histology of bone. Bone is supporting connective tissue with a solid matrix, special cells, and a lot of collagen fibers. The cells that make the bone are called osteocytes. So the artery and vein are found in a central canal called Haversian canal. And the osteocytes are found in a colony around it in concentric circles called lamellae. The osteocytes, will have cytoplasmic extensions called canaliculi. Thereby, they are able to get their nourishment and oxygen for survival. A colony of osteocytes arranged in a laminae around the central canal or Haversian canal is called as one osteon. So, this is the fundamental unit of compact bone with the osteocytes arranged in concentric rings. So the bone matrix that is actually maintained by the osteocytes is made of a chemical called hydroxyapatite. So two-thirds of the bone matrix is calcium phosphate that reacts with calcium hydroxide to form a chemical called hydroxyapatite that can incorporate other calcium salts and ions. The fiber that is found in your bone is mainly collagen fiber. It's called ossin. The bone cells only make, the osteocytes only make 2% of the bone mass. The four main types of cells that you find in bone is called osteocyte, osteoblast, osteoprogenitor cell, that is the stem cell, and osteoclast. So these are the four different types of cells that's found in a bone. So here in the cross section of the bone, this figure is showing where these cells are found. So the osteocyte is a mature bone cell that lives in its own space called lacuna, and they are found in concentric circles called lamellae. The cytoplasmic extensions are called canaliculi, and the main function is that they maintain the protein and mineral content of the matrix, and they will play a huge role in bone repair. Osteoblast is immature bone cell. It can also secrete components of the matrix. So the formation of bone or osteogenesis is because of osteocyte and osteoblast. So the osteoblast, when it matures, it becomes an osteocyte. The bone matrix that's not developed yet. It's been developed by the osteoblast is called osteoid. Osteoprogenitor cell, here it is, are mesenchymal cells. They are stem cells. They can divide to form the osteoblast. They are usually located in the endosteum and also in the inner layer of the periosteum. So they will play a role in bone remodeling and during fractures. Osteoclast is a very interesting cell. It's multinucleate, and then it can secrete acids and enzymes to break down the bone to release calcium. So when our body is low on calcium, osteoclast will actually dissolve our own bone in order to maintain calcium homeostasis. This figure is very important. This is the histology of the bone. So here's the central canal with the artery and the vein. And the osteocytes are found in concentric circles around the central canal, also called Haversian canal, from the scientist who discovered it. The cells, the osteocytes, will have cytoplasmic extensions called canaliculi. And one colony of osteocytes that are being nourished by one Haversian canal is called as a osteon. The interstitial lamellae are found in between the osteons, and the lamellae that goes around binding all the osteons together are called circumferential lamellae. And then the protective layer of the bone is called periosteum. And you can see how the arteries and veins from there are going to dip into, perforate into the bone. They are called perforating canal or Volkmann canal, through which the artery and the vein will go through, carrying blood and nutrients to all the osteocytes. Compact bone. So here this is compact bone where the osteons are tightly packed and the lamellae is tightly packed, is very strong, and it can withstand compressive forces. It can take a lot of pressure and force. Whereas on the inside of the bone, you can see the spongy bone. It looks like a coral. It has a lots of spaces in between, and all these projections are called trabeculae of spongy bone. This can evenly distribute the pressure. So here's a close-up of spongy bone. So they don't have colonies called osteons. The matrix forms an open network called trabeculae. The blood vessels, there are no blood vessels, but there are big arteries that are going to be going through it. It's filled with bone marrow and stuff. So it's going to get its nourishment directly from the red bone marrow. It can also have yellow bone marrow, which would be a source of energy in times of need. So this is the microarchitecture of spongy bone, where we can see trabeculae. Periosteum is dense, irregular connective tissue that covers all the bones in our body. So it's very protective in function. It is found everywhere except in the joint capsules. So the main function is to isolate the bone from the surrounding tissue, and then it provides a conduit for arteries and veins to enter and nourish the bone. It is made up of two layers, the outer fibrous layer and the inner cellular layer or the cambium layer, which is, it has a lot of stem cells or osteogenic cells. The fibrous layer will have fibroblast, and the cellular layer will have the stem cells. It will also have perforating fibers or collagen fibers that will radiate from the periosteum, and it will enter the bone, and it can provide a good attachment with tendons and ligaments, and also in the joint cavity. Endosteum is the inner lining of the bone. So you can see in the bone marrow, it is broken. It is the inner lining, it is incomplete. It lines the medullary cavity, covers the trabeculae. It contains all the different types of cells called osteoblast, the osteoprogenitor cell, and the osteoclast. It will play an important role during bone remodeling and growth and during fractures. How is bone made? So bone, so like if you study fetal development, you can see how the baby, when it's in during the early stages of development, there's not many bones in it. It's hyaline cartilage. And then through different processes of osteogenesis, which is bone formation, and ossification, where one type of tissue is actually replaced by bone tissue. So endochondral ossification refers to where hyaline cartilage is converted to bone tissue. Intramembranous ossification is when mesenchymal cells and fibrous connective tissue become bone tissue. The process of deposition of calcium in the bone is called calcification. So let's look at the endochondral and intramembranous ossification. So here is a cartoon model that is showing how a hyaline cartilage model is replaced and is converted into bone. So this happens in fetal development. So the hyaline cartilage is very systematically replaced by bone tissue. So in step 1, the chondrocytes that are found in the center of the hyaline cartilage model, they enlarge and they die and they form a calcified matrix. Newly formed osteoblast. So here you can see how an artery is attracted to this hyaline model here. So as the artery nourishes the shaft of the bone, it will lay a thin layer of bone here. So the osteoblast is laying down bone tissue. Very soon the artery is going to penetrate into the hyaline model here, and it will form or it's like differentiation happening here, and then the new osteoblast will form a primary ossification center. And then as the artery branches and grows, it ossifies and calcifies here. So the bone of the shaft is thickening and the cartilage near the epiphysis is replaced by a shaft of bone. Arteries also penetrate the epiphyseal region here, and this would be the secondary ossification center. So very soon, the hyaline cartilage is slowly replaced by bone, by osteoblasts, and it is nourished by arteries. So this is an X-ray of, so the one on the right is a adult X-ray, and here's a child where you can see the epiphyseal line. And as after puberty, the epiphyseal line or the growth plate is completely sealed and you don't see it in the adult X-ray. So the epiphyseal line completely disappears because it has ossified. It has been replaced by bone. The hyaline cartilage is replaced by bone in adult. The next type of bone formation is intramembranous ossification. So this is where either fibrous connective tissue or mesenchymal cells will form ossification centers and differentiate into osteoblast that will produce the bone matrix, which will later undergo calcification. So as the osteoblast is enclosed by the bone matrix, they will become osteocytes. So here you can see something called spicules, which will actually trap. So the bone is actually trapping a blood vessel. So the blood vessel later becomes the central canal. So the bone will grow from the ossification center in linear extensions called spicules. Blood vessels will then grow and branch around the spicules, thereby forming bone tissue. The continued growth of several ossification centers will result in the enlargement and fusion of the spicules in the trabecular network of spongy tissue here. So over time, the bone will assume the structure of spongy bone. Then areas of the spongy bone might either be removed, creating a medullary cavity, and then it will go further, undergo a lot of remodeling, and then it can be converted to compact bone. This picture is showing how vascular bone is. So bone has a very rich supply of arteries and veins. So here in this foramen, you can see the main nutrient artery, like one big artery that's entering into the medullary cavity, and then it branches further. Thereby, the whole bone is nourished. We see another artery where the metaphyseal line is. It's called metaphyseal artery and vein. We also have a epiphyseal artery and vein. There is also blood supply right under the periosteum, in the periosteum. So they are called periosteal artery and vein. So how does our body maintain calcium levels? Calcium is very important. When the calcium content falls below 8.5 milligram per deciliter, so this is called hypocalcemia. This has several adverse effects on blood circulation, your muscle action, action potentials. So without calcium, your body has a tough time with coagulating blood. Your heart, the pacemaker, or the action potentials in your heart are interrupted. So you can actually skip a heartbeat. So this is very serious. Nerves can become damaged and the bones can become brittle when calcium levels drop. So the main hormone that plays a role in bringing up the calcium level is the parathyroid gland hormone called parathyroid hormone. So they are going to detect the low calcium levels, and the parathyroid hormone will work on your intestines, asking for increase in the rate of absorption of calcium. It will act on the kidneys, asking the kidneys to conserve calcium. It will work on the osteoclast to because osteoclasts can make enzymes and acids to actually dissolve the bone and release the calcium. So the calcium can be released that way. More calcium are absorbed. Calcium is conserved in the kidneys. Thereby, the calcium level is restored in the blood. So the enzyme that plays a role in increasing calcium levels is parathyroid hormone. On the other hand, when your calcium levels are very high, it's above 11 milligram per deciliter of blood, then the thyroid gland will stimulate the parafollicular cells in the thyroid gland to secrete a hormone called calcitonin. So calcitonin is going to tone down or reduce the amount of calcium in your blood by reducing absorption in the intestines, increasing secretion in the kidneys, and it will inhibit, osteoclasts are inhibited. So the calcium level is restored. So it's going to pack the calcium back in the bone. So thereby we have a calcium homeostasis. It's like the yin and yang of calcium. So calcitonin and parathyroid hormone have opposite actions. There are several hormones in our body that's also going to be affecting bone growth and maintenance. For example, the growth hormone made by the pituitary gland is going to stimulate the osteoblast activity, and then it will promote synthesis of the bone matrix. Calcitriols of the kidneys will promote calcium and phosphate ion absorption in the digestive tract. We saw parathyroid and calcitonin. Sex hormones also have an effect on growth, bone growth, and maintenance. There are several types of bone fracture, which is nothing but a broken bone that is caused by extreme physical stress. Fractures are classified by their complexity, location, direction, and several other features. So, a transverse fracture occurs straight along the long axis of the bone. Oblique fracture occurs at an angle. A spiral fracture, the bone segments are pulled apart because of a twisting motion. Comminuted is several minor breaks. Impacted is one fragment is driven into the other. Green stick is a partial fracture in which one side of the bone is broken. Open fracture, a fracture in which at least one end of the broken bone tears through the skin. Closed fracture is when the skin remains intact. So, how does our body heal itself when there's a fracture? So, the first step to happen anytime you break a bone is fracture hematoma. So, within a few hours, a blood clot is formed. Immediately after the fracture, there's bleeding and there's a blood clot. It's called fracture hematoma. This is followed by the development of an internal callus formed as a network of spongy bone that is trying to unite the inner edges, and an external callus of cartilage and bone that is going to stabilize the outer edge. And then over a period of time, a lot of remodeling has to happen. The cartilage of the external callus will be replaced by bone. And the spongy tissue has now made all these bridges. Fragments of dead bone and all the uh, other debris there has been phagocytized. So initially, when the bone heals, there is, you can see that bump. The external callus is still seen, but over a period of time, there's more remodeling of bone that will happen that will like shave off this bump. So, what are some of the age related changes that we can see in bone? So, we can see the bone density or the bone mass is optimal when you are younger, when between 20s and 40s. But as you age, the bone mass is uh, lost. So, there are exercises, like especially strength training that can restore this, but it's mainly because it's hormonal. The hormonal changes that happens with aging is the reason as to why we lost bone mass. So the bones become thinner and weaker with age. Osteopenia will start early on. Women lose 88% of the bone mass in a decade, in like 10 years, whereas it's only 3% in men. Osteoporosis is referring to very severe bone mass over the age of 75. And here you can see 29% of women are affected and 80% of men, 18% of men are affected. Estrogen and androgens, they will help to maintain the bone mass. So when these hormones change after menopause in women, it is kind of accelerated. So intake of calcium through the diet is very important, and exercise also is very important. Cancer also has an adverse effect on bone density because cancerous tissue, they activate osteoclast stimulating factors, that can lead to osteoporosis. So here you can see healthy bone, spongy bone that is healthy, whereas in osteoporosis you can see all the holes and the the holes that's made the bone very less dense and weak, and it's easy to break then. So in this chapter, we studied that bone is supportive connective tissue with a solid matrix, a lot of fibers, and special cells. So we studied the bone histology, we studied the function of bones in our body, the structure. We studied the classification of bones depending on shape. We also studied the classification of bone depending on its internal organization. We studied bone markings and how they play a huge role in attachment of ligaments um, and tendons. We studied compact bone and spongy bone. We studied the protective connective layer, connective tissue layer, the periosteum and the endosteum, and the layers of periosteum. We studied the process of ossification and calcification, how bone is actually formed. We studied the blood supply for bones. We studied the chemical composition of bones and how bones can remodel and how it plays a huge role in calcium homeostasis. We studied how the bone heal itself after a fracture. We studied the effect of aging on bones. And I hope that was helpful.